So this provides a specific example of what I was just talking about with coenzymes. This shows the kind of basic metabolic pathway related to energy and obtaining energy. One of the steps in this, in the red here, is the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, which is an essential step in energy production. So in that, you'll notice the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex in that kind of right in the middle there with that pathway. That complex is what allows the whole conversion to happen. The complex requires thiamine in the form of TDP, riboflavin in the form of FAD, and niacin in the form of NAD+. So without those B vitamins, the complex cannot function. So this is just one of those many metabolic examples of coenzymes or cofactors that are required for the release of energy from macronutrients or other stores. So in this case, like from right here, from glucose or other stores. So folate, although we often use folate and folic acid interchangeably, they actually aren't interchangeable terms. They are different. So folic acid refers to the oxidized form, and this is what's found in fortified foods or supplements, whereas folate is the reduced form, and that's what's found naturally in foods and tissues. Now, our body can make those conversions, but they actually are in those different forms. So again, this uses folate as an example, and remembering that I'm just picking some vitamins and minerals to kind of use for as examples to highlight or illustrate, I guess, points. So this point being the different forms that exist and how those forms change from one to another. But remember, this can be similar for other nutrients. So as you're reading through the materials, kind of thinking about this. So this is just an image that shows all these different forms of folate. So kind of remember that a lot of what the form tells you, these different forms, is kind of chemical groups being added or deleted. So for example, moving from the DHF to the THF form related to folate, we gain hydrogen atoms. When we move to the methyl and methylene tetrahydrofolate forms, we're looking at the movement of methyl groups. So this changes the form of the vitamin, but the bottom line remains that the sort of core structure that makes up the vitamin, in this case it's a vitamin, but it could also be a mineral, that core structure is really what's needed for the reaction to happen. And then the ability of the nutrient to take on those different forms is what allows it to function as a cofactor in metabolic reactions. So kind of just looking at how these change from one form to another. Now in reality, we'll look at this a little bit more too, or there's some in the book, but sometimes one of the steps that are listed, for example, in this one of these steps in the metabolic process doesn't work well in an individual person, maybe because of a genetic mutation or maybe because of a disease or disorder. And so in that case, that person's going to have a hard time converting between those forms. So again, when we think of something like vitamin supplementation, that may mean for that person, we need to give them a supplement in a different form because they aren't converting how we would normally expect them to. So those are kind of all considerations when you think about how to what the practical implications of this are. So B12 I'll use as an example for some of the issues that can be involved in vitamin and mineral absorption. So again, it's not only B12 that has issues related to this, but I think B12 is a really good example because it has a few kind of unique things going on. So vitamin B12 is found in food. It's bound to protein. We need it to be unbound from that protein in order to absorb it. So the stomach acid actually cleaves that B12 from the food. And then B12 binds to different proteins in order to be transported into the small intestine from the stomach. Once it's in the small intestine, the B12 is released from the R protein and binds with intrinsic factor. And then the B12 intrinsic factor complex is what the cell receptor can actually recognize for absorption. So kind of think about all the places something could go wrong with B12 absorption. If someone had, for example, a lack of stomach acid, that B12 is not going to be as effectively cleaved from the protein. So that could be impaired there. If someone has a resection of part of their stomach, maybe they had gastric cancer, maybe they had gastric bypass surgery, something like that, and so some of their stomach is gone, perhaps then they don't have very much intrinsic factor. So that's going to cause a problem with B12 absorption. Maybe they have resection of the small intestine, and that could impair binding of the B12 to intrinsic factor and or even absorption into the cell. So this specific process is unique to B12, but I think it's good to consider all these different various steps that happen in the absorption of nutrients when we start to apply this to disease conditions. So kind of, again, one of those things to be sort of on the lookout for, because often we sort of think about, okay, we eat a certain nutrient in a food source, it gets in the body, boom, we're good. But depending on what that vitamin or mineral or nutrient is, there could be a variety of places that something could go wrong and not happen ideally. And so then someone may be getting suboptimal status in the body, even if their dietary intake is what seems to be adequate. So just a few key considerations that I hope will help you kind of organize your thoughts. Again, a lot of vitamins and minerals, it's information that you'll read through, but if you can kind of think it in some sort of a context and a way to sort of organize categories, I guess, in your mind, I think that's helpful. So there's some major biological functions that water-soluble vitamins serve, like the cofactors, the redox reaction, those that we've looked at. So kind of think about, how those fit in those broad categories of functions. Then remember, there's these multiple forms of one nutrient, and the body, if things are working properly, can generally convert between those two forms, between the multiple forms. Sometimes there's often enzymes and those types of things that need to be there. So some particular, again, genetic mutation or disease or things like that could impact that conversion. But generally, there are these multiple forms that move from one to another depending on what the body needs for function. I think it's important that we really kind of appreciate the complexity of these metabolic pathways, because it's very easy to look narrowly at what a particular vitamin, for example, does, and not think about how it may impact a lot of other metabolic pathways. I think this kind of in, I guess, popular literature, or maybe when people have a little bit less education about nutrition, they sometimes get it oversimplistic. And I think we really need to sort of, again, just appreciate the complexity of the interaction between all these metabolic pathways. And then thinking about all the steps that have to happen for absorption and transport to occur, and how diseases or conditions could impair either the absorption or the transport. And on the flip side, if they have impaired absorption and transport, it can contribute to diseases because those nutrients are not getting in where they need. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of framework as you move forward with looking at all of the different specific water-soluble vitamins this week.